Let's say hi to Priya Kale in New York, astrologer, writer, priyakale.com, wealth of knowledge on all things astrological, and you can find her on cosmicdiaries.com. Hello, Priya.
Hi, Steve. Hello, everyone.
Hi,
Hi,
Priya.
Priya.
Hi, Priya.
How
Hi,
are things in New
Priya.
York, Priya?
Oh, fall is here, but I like fall in New York. The
Excellent.
weather's getting cooler.
Well, somewhere a little warmer, Janine Patrick in California. She describes herself as CPA and gypsy fortune teller who can know your tax refund before you walk in the door. She'd said that jokingly, but it's true.
It is true, isn't it?
Hello, Janine. How is California?
We have beautiful, beautiful weather here. I'm up in the San Bernardino Mountains, so it's a little bit cooler, but it's a beautiful fall day.
Excellent. Welcome. Not far from you, Mike McClatchy, Sacramento. Really artisan, painter, keyboardist, magazine reviewer. Mike is Renaissance man, basically, and into all things spiritual. How are you, Mike?
I'm doing very well.
Okay, and what's happening over in Sacramento right now?
Actually, the weather's great. It's cool in the evenings and getting kind of warm during the day. So,
Excellent. Well, to the other extreme of the time zones in the UK, Sarah Davis in Manchester, England, she, as is typically Sarah's style, completely understates herself. Sarah's a very passionate, powerful person, great energy worker, and into all things spiritual. How are things in Manchester, Sarah?
Hi, they're great actually. Yeah, very good, nice day here.
It's
Sunny.
warm back in England?
It has been. We've had October's the new August.
Nicely put, girl.
Yeah, so it's dark now, early evening, but it's been a lovely, lovely sunny day, so it makes a nice change.
Oh, excellent. Welcome aboard. And last but by no means least, and today's guest, Gail Jenner from Bournemouth, describes herself as an office manager for a potty company. I think she's serious about that. Enjoys music, yoga, dance, writing, and drawing. And interestingly, great granny and mother were mediums in Ireland, and she's been interested in that and all things metaphysical and UFOs, etc., since childhood. Hello.
Hi, Steve.
How's Bournemouth?
It's beautiful today. Well, it's dark and autumnal now, but it's been a beautiful sunny day down here on the south coast of England.
I don't know if you've heard, but October is the new August.
Apparently so. I agree, Sarah.
So we're here to talk about spiritual addiction, and Gail's going to front this up for us because it's something that's been very powerful part of your life, but also all of us have experienced that. So do you want to describe what you mean, Gail, by spiritual addiction? What was your addiction? What was its nature? What were you addicted to?
Okay, so I was pretty much addicted to tarot readings, horoscopes. I had 7 decks of oracle cards myself. I had a pendulum. I would consult these on a daily basis, and more often, probably 4 or 5 times a day. I would have readings. I think the most I clocked up was 5 readings with different, external readers, 5 readings in 6 weeks. And I would lie to everyone about that. No, they didn't know, the respective readers didn't know that I'd been for one a week before. Sometimes I'd have 2 in a week.
Is this actually going to them or calling them on the phone? Or
Actually going to them.
Oh.
Yeah.
What was the most addictive of all those things?
Probably the readings. I would say the readings were the most addictive. I would record them on my phone and I would listen to them repetitively, probably about 4 or 5 times a day. I'd listen to them. I'd factor that into my day. So if I was walking to work, I'd be listening on my headphones. If I was cooking, I'd have one earphone in and listening to a reading. If I was laying in bed, I'd be listening to the reading. It didn't stop.
Sarah, this is Janine. Was there one event or a series of events that led you into this addiction?
When I got divorced, it was about 5 years ago, and I had been married or in that relationship since I was 15 years old. So I found myself at 38 years old lost, actually. I had always delved into mediumistic interests right back from what I remember. I remember sitting in circles when I was 16 years old, up until I had my children. And then when I had children, I stopped being involved in any of it. I'd have the occasional reading maybe once every few years if there was a big event going on in my life. But I would say it all started to snowball when my marriage ended.
Sarah, this is Priya, by the way. That's interesting because I can relate to that. Of course, as Steve mentioned, I am an astrologer now. I work as an astrologer, and I've always been interested in astrology in everything occult and spiritual since I can remember, possibly. But it was after my divorce, which was now well over about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, that my study of astrology intensified. So I would say I can relate to it in the sense of I didn't necessarily go to other readers, but I started studying astrology very intensely because it was my way of trying to seek control when I felt so out of control.
I was very lost at the time, and I was searching for something, and I didn't really know what it was, but I needed to know. I always needed to know what laid ahead of me, and I took things, to even deeper extremes, quite dark extremes after that. I delved into a lot deeper than just the readings. But at the most part, the most addictive part for me was the readings. And then I started studying mediumship myself. And that escalated very quickly into trance mediumship, which at its probably most unbalanced state became physical mediumship. So yes, it did really escalate quite deeply for me.
Do you want to explain what trance mediumship and physical mediumship is?
So physical mediumship is when you would sit in a trance-like state. So the medium sits and meditates until they go into a trance-like state, and it is believed that spirit entities then channel through the medium. And I had taken myself off to multiple courses where I'd actually witnessed mediums going into the trance-like state, and physical objects would start to move in the room, or I witnessed a couple of times ectoplasm being emitted from the medium's body. And so ectoplasm is a substance that is apparently of a spirit entity that would then come out of the medium's body and form shapes in the room. Or objects would fly around the room. Things were apported from different realms and sort of land in the room. It was really quite intense. So I obviously didn't get to that stage, but I did sit in meditation every day, every single day without fail for a good 30 minutes. And what I thought was sort of calming meditation was actually I was sitting with the intention of attracting different spirits, and it escalated quite quickly. And I did start having symptoms of physical change, lots of shaking, vibrating, being moved around, being poked. My voice would change. At the very end, which was 2 years ago when I completely stopped what I was doing, I came out of one session with my face physically scratched. I had red scratch marks down both cheeks, and it really frightened me. Yeah, it was very, very ungrounded and very dangerous. And at the time, I absolutely thought that all spirits were happy and floaty and kind, and I didn't for 1 minute think that there was anything that could have hurt me. I never felt threatened, but clearly coming out of that session, I was really quite shaken up.
It's Sarah. Hi, Gail.
Hi, Sarah.
I was just wondering, is that what made you realise that you actually had a problem with it, experiencing the scratches and how that made you feel? Is that what triggered you to see?
No, I still didn't think that was a problem. That scared me.
Well,
but I still
I'm
realised I had a problem.
Curious,
sorry, carry on.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'm curious. Like, what so what was the jump from, just doing readings to then wanting to be a physical medium? And
Yeah.
like, how did that happen?
Okay, so what happened is I escalated into the readings, and then I got involved in the local spiritualism movement. I would go to church. I went to spiritualist church every week, and I was fascinated with the demonstrations on stage. It's something I grew up with my family practicing. I'd always had a knowing as a child. I always knew what was going to happen. So I was fascinated with what they were doing at this church. And then I started doing little courses, and I did a basics in mediumship. And
Right.
I did some readings for people within that group, and they were, really well received. And so I went on to study further mediumship classes. I went on to do my Reiki, and then a local group were having a physical seance. So I went to that, and I was hooked. I was absolutely hooked. Fascinated. And then I went on to do another one. I went away for a week's residential, which was really intensive, and I watched several mediums demonstrating physical mediumship. And then I think probably what led me on to the trance, I did another week's really very deep and intense course attempting to learn how to get out of body and astral traveling.
Have you experienced any of this?
Well, not the mediumship and not the trance mediumship, certainly, but astral travel, yes, a lot. I mean, there was a period in my life when I just moved to the States and I couldn't work because I didn't have my work permit and everything was still coming through. So I had all day to do nothing, really. So I would wake up in the morning and then I would go back to bed and I would astral travel. I would practice astral traveling, and I had great success with it.
Did you find it beneficial?
Not necessarily. It was just an experience. It was like, oh, okay, that's cool. But then I do remember this one time, and this was not an intentional astral travel session that I had. This was, after this little phase that I went through where I realized, oh, I can do this. But I think it was a few years later when I was in my astral body, and I did come across entities that were very, it made me I realized that there's other realms out there that, you have to be able to know how to navigate if you're going to go there. And do you really want to go there?
Was it addictive?
For that little period, initially it was, but I grew out of it, I suppose. It was for a couple of months.
Anybody else? Janine, did you say something?
Oh, yeah. I've been astral traveling almost as long as I can remember. I did a week-long class at Monroe Institute and had some interesting experiences. The one thing I think I would conclude is that if you leave the body and you tend to stay what I call local, which is very, very close to this, the physical area, you can run into all kinds of nasty entities. And I almost felt that when I did the class, since the focus of the class was to have this group of people get out of body, that there were a whole group just waiting.
Right.
Anybody? Sarah, did you have something to say?
I've experienced it, but not intentionally.
Is it scary?
A couple of times. A little, maybe. A little, but I was also curious. I almost feel, and around that time, I felt like if I wanted to do it again, I could. It was there waiting. That's the only way I can explain. But I didn't. A couple of times,
So it was more scary than addictive then.
Yeah, it wasn't addictive. I was more cautious about it and thinking I don't really want to push that further, so I didn't.
What about you, Mike?
Well, the system I used to work under was really careful with these sort of things, or at least it came across that way, where in terms of like contacting spirits and things like that, there were always rituals and precautions involved in making sure that some of the nastier stuff didn't come through, if that makes sense. And so it's interesting to me to hear other people's experiences in terms of like just diving into mediumship and sort of letting through any types of spirits, because from my experience, they do range, and some of them are. I wouldn't say necessarily dangerous, but more like impish.
Was it addictive?
Does that make sense?
Is it something that you got sucked into, or you just leave alone
No.
if you didn't want to do it?
No, I wasn't addicted to it. I've had some experience with astral travel and lucid dreaming, and I always found that those to be sort of exciting situations. I mean, a little bit dark maybe, but I wasn't addicted to it.
Thank you. But Gail, back to the readings. Did that escalate?
Mm-hmm.
Was that always pretty constant, or did that escalate like the mediumship did?
No, it was constant. But then when I developed, after the last out-of-body experience I had on this course, something changed, and I went on to a period of trembling and shaking, and that's when I started going into trance mediumship. And then I would get myself into that state on a daily basis to ask the questions that I was desperate up for answers from the reading.
So the key to this is... Sorry,
go on.
No, say what you're going to say, and I'll edit that bit out.
I would say the more I worked in that area, the more friends I had, the more sort of free readings I would get. So I would enter competitions, and I would sort of ask all these people I'd met in forums for readings. So it did escalate alongside the trance, but in the trance state, I was also asking the questions, and then I would go and conduct my own. I'd spread the oracle cards out over the bed after I'd listened to a reading, and it didn't matter how many times I'd heard the reading. I still had to run through the oracle cards. I'd have to get the pendulum out. It was really, it was obsessive.
Did you feel better after you had gone through these exercises?
I would have a temporary high, I would say, mainly from the trance mediumship. I'd sit there and feel completely blissed out for maybe 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. And then it would just deflate, and then I'd be in floods of tears. I know Sarah asked me earlier on, was the scratching on my face the turning point? It wasn't. The turning point for me was I was doing all of this, and my day was really quite chaotic. I wasn't sleeping. I was consulting the horoscopes from sort of midnight onwards, and then I would run into all the readings, the pendulum, the oracles. My turning point for me was actually feeling suicidal, and I think that was the dark place I fell into. I really did reach a point where nothing was making me feel better. They were temporary little buzzes from what I was doing, but it certainly wasn't helpful.
And what was the aim? What was sorry.
The aim. Sorry, carry on.
No, Mike was going to say something. Mike, you go ahead.
Oh no, actually, I didn't say anything. But I do have sort of a question in terms of how when you have all these different messages on all these different readings, how did you reconcile a lot of the information you were getting? I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, when I look back on it now, retrospectively, I think half of the readers were telling me the facts, and I think half of them were telling me exactly what I wanted to hear, and that's why I kept going back, because I wanted an outcome. I was going with a very specific agenda, and they weren't giving it to me half the time, which is why I kept going back. I wanted to be told a certain answer, and I wasn't getting it. So that's why I just kept going back.
Did anybody ever...
I think that's definitely a part of it, a lot of the times.
Did anybody ever suggest to you, Gail, that you were having too many readings? Did you revisit people?
I was very crafty, actually. I was quite sneaky, because I had lots of different friends who were, and still are friends who work in that area. And I think I lied when they said to me, when did you have your last reading? I remember going to a psychic fair, having one reading, crying my eyes out because she wasn't telling me what I wanted to hear, and then walking around and picking another guy to have another reading sort of 10 minutes later, who I knew wasn't in the direct sight of this other woman, so he couldn't have seen that I'd already had a reading in that psychic fair in this one sort of little village hall. So I was very clever about it. I was sneaky.
Anybody else?
Nobody knew that I was.
Anybody else found they were doing that? It's certainly something I've done when I was hooked on it, and most people I come across have done that because when you're in an addictive mode, you tend not to be truthful even with yourself. Would everyone agree?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, I never.
I mean, you're really
experienced
trying to
that.
hide it from yourself. That's what
Yeah.
it is.
I didn't. I called Steve once. He talked to me, and that was all I wanted to know. Yeah, this is Janine. I have a question. Did you feel during this that you didn't want to be living in the here and now so much that you did anything to take you outside of it?
I think to some extent that's true. I stopped watching TV. In fact, I removed the TV from my lounge, and I used to take great delight in saying, I'm spiritual, I don't watch TV. I completely shut myself off from what was happening in the world. I didn't want to know about anything negative. I tried to remain in this little bubble the whole time of positivity, and I really didn't want to know what was going on. I just was so ungrounded. I wouldn't face anything. And I think, yeah, I mean, there was a point where I really didn't want to live. And it was brief, but that was my sort of rock bottom, I think. And I was on about 30 sites on Facebook at the time, spiritual sites that I would look at these quotes every day. And I would post probably, I don't know, half a dozen positive quotes every day on Facebook. And it was actually on that site that I came across something that was about to change my life, in that I would really get out of the rock bottom place and heal myself. And I didn't need any of these other things to do that. But yeah, absolutely. I really wanted to remove myself. And I think that's why I did the out of body journeying. I just didn't want to be in this environment anymore.
Hi, Gail. I was just wondering how long this period lasted for. How long were you consulting readers, etc., doing the courses? How long did that period last?
Intensively, about 3 years.
Wow, that's
altogether.
A long time.
Wow.
Yeah, it was about 3 years, and several £1,000s later, which is really quite shocking to look back on. And what's sad for me when I look back on it over that period of time, certainly for the last year, before I had, stopped, when I was doing the trance and I felt I had to do this every day, I would actually ask my children to go and sit in their bedroom, because I lived in a little flat, and they couldn't come into the lounge because mum was meditating, and they just accepted mum was meditating. And I made them do this every single day, stay in their room so mum could meditate. And the reason I did that was because I didn't want them to see me channeling spirit entities and shuddering all over the place and talking in strange voices. And sometimes they would hear me, I think, and then I'd be bursting into tears in the middle of these sessions, or I'd come out of these sessions and then I'd have a little high, and then I would just burst into tears. And it was just a horrific time. And now when I look back on it, it really did. It was really a sad state to be in, and it would have had an impact on my children for sure.
Did you ever feel scared while doing that?
Sometimes in the out of body stuff, I felt scared. And yeah, there was a couple of occasions, because I was doing it every single day, I started getting things physically banging in the room, my bed covers getting pulled off me, my name being called, physically being, I'd sit there with my eyes closed, physically being sort of poked in the stomach by something. And there was a couple of times during those meditations, I would say it probably only a handful of times, where I'd have to open my eyes because I really felt something quite dark stood in front of me. But I didn't see any danger in it. And I believe now that the scratches on my face, although I didn't feel any harm at the time, I think it was purely my face was stretching physically into the shape of a man. And I think it was like stretch marks, because it lasted for a few days. It wasn't like physical gouges. It was almost like stretch marks.
Wow.
But I remember in that... Sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, did the group that was teaching you offer you any kind of protective advice, or was it just open yourself up to anything?
No, they of course offered me advice, but I did all this on my own. I didn't do it in a group. I sat on my own and was able to get these things to happen on my own. In fact, it freaked me out so much at one point. When it all first started to begin, it was so physical. And I would be sitting and meditating, and I had no control over it, or I didn't feel I had any control. So I'd be retching in my meditation. I was actually physically retching, and like as if sounds were trying to get out of my throat. I felt choked. It was really very physical, and I was really quite scared. So I spoke to one of my spiritual teachers, who I still have absolute respect for, who really had no idea I was taking it to that extreme, had no idea I was doing the readings that I was doing. And I sat in front of a couple of, well-renowned mediums who witnessed the physical mediumship and were impressed, and never felt that there was any danger. But it was a very physical experience. It really did, in the early stages, jolt me across the room. It was actually quite painful at times. My day would start at midnight. And I had a smartphone that had 3 or 4 horoscope apps on it. So I'd wait up till midnight and I would look at all the 4 horoscope apps, which all had 3 different parts to them. So I'd have between 9 and 12 instructions on there on career, love, and things like that. So I would begin with that. Then I would go to sleep. I'd wake up in the morning. I'd listen to a reading before I got out of bed. I would take my children to school. I would drive to back home with listening to a reading, something that had pre-recorded. And at that stage, I was really not functioning. So I'd probably hop back into bed and sleep until the very last minute and then get up. I used to work a lunchtime job. So I'd get up at the last minute, drive to work, listening to one of my readings again, do my work shift. And I was quite distracted at work at the time. Come back out, pick up the children, get on with cooking dinner, listening to a reading with one headphone in. I'd sit and meditate after we'd had dinner. Then I would lay out some oracle cards on the bed. I'd consult. I had 7 decks, so I'd consult them over and over, different layouts, different things. Then I'd get the pendulum out and ask some questions on that. I'd listen to maybe another reading or 2, and then I'd be waiting up, doing all this until midnight so I could check the horoscopes again until the next day.
So it was all consuming then? You had no life other than
all consuming.
No time for anything else.
No. Nobody knew how erratic I was behaving. I wasn't eating properly. As I say, it would have definitely had an effect on my children. And at one point, and it's only something that I've discussed recently, but at one point my ex-husband, I made him pay for money towards, I begged him pretty much to pay some money towards one of my readings, because I just thought that if I had that reading, if I just knew the answer, then everything would be okay. And that's all I felt every day. If I can just do this, I just know that it'll work out. But I was also terrified. I thought that if I thought a bad thought in my head, that I was somehow bringing all these problems to myself. So it was just such a frantic, chaotic time. I didn't eat properly. I lost lots of weight. I pretended to everyone that I was happy. And inside, I was absolutely dying. I was living a chaotic life. And when I got to go and have a reading, when I had enough money, and in England, it's about 35 to 40 pounds for a reading. It was such a buzz. It was such a kick. I could just, my life depended on being told the future. And then I'd listen to that reading multiple times afterwards.
In every sense of drug then, yeah?
Absolutely. But, probably frighteningly so available, because with social media, I was saturated with it. I could, nobody knew what I was doing behind closed doors. They didn't know I could sit on my laptop in bed at night and just scroll through and get free readings online. And, I honestly couldn't count how many free readings that I've got from people.
Do we all agree that it is actually the buzz of chasing this elusive answer, the one answer that's going to fix us, that is the issue from our experience and experience of people we know?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, Gail, did people say to you you've got a problem, or they just didn't see it?
No, nobody. The only person I think who probably noticed I had a problem was my ex-husband, because he could see how erratic my behavior was. And he also, felt at one point that I would probably have to surrender the care of the children to him, because I was up and down and all over the place. I couldn't see it. My children were too young to really know that there was a problem. But he could obviously see that I was behaving quite differently.
Did he know why? That it was due to you seeking these readings, etc.? Or was he just aware that your behaviour?
Yeah, I did tell him about it. Not to the extent, he didn't know half of it, but he did say to me, why do you need to know? That he kept saying to me, why would you need to know? What's the point of it? But I didn't really care what anyone thought. Mm-hmm. I didn't think I had a problem. And I know now, when I look back on some of the readings I had, that they were telling me that I needed to just relax and get on with the life. But of course, they all didn't know about the other ones giving me reading. Nobody knew to the extent of how many readings I had or how much money I was spending doing it. It's just, I could have bought a couple of new cars in the UK for what I've spent in those in that sort of core period of about 2 years. I pretty much spent over a third of the proceeds of the sale of my house that I'd spent 23 years building. So it was very ungrounded, very costly, and very, very damaging.
Do we all know people that have done this as well?
Yes.
Not to that degree.
I come across people that have spent this sort of money. I've also had a period many years ago now, but I was a super addicted, completely out of control. And I wonder how many of you know of or heard of people or seen them in forums and that sort of thing, because I see it very common, but then again, it's part of my day-to-day work. So I wonder, how much other people have seen this at work, in people they know and people they've seen online. Priya, you start.
Sure. There is one person that I know, and I recently heard about this story where she was addicted to one fortune teller, not many, but there was this one person who kind of just over a course of years pilfered her for money, and thousands of dollars. And, just feeding into this fear of, you need to spend this money and then this will be okay. It was just thousands and thousands of dollars. And I think it was a self-esteem issue, but again, it was that buzz, that reassurance that kept her going back. And from what I hear, I mean, she pretty much wiped herself out financially. Like, I'm talking like tens of thousands of dollars.
Wow.
Yes. And then I think a friend finally figured it out, and, I don't remember how it ended, but I think someone called the bank, and it was almost like she was under some kind of a spell. Like when she related it to me, that's what it sounded like to me. But it was just intense. I think this went on with her for about 2 or 3 years, and I was pretty shocked when I heard about it, because I didn't know her well, but I had no clue.
I mean, the nature of addiction, this is typical for addiction of all sorts, isn't it? Being out of control, not realizing you have a problem, and sacrifice anything to get the drug of choice. Anybody else got experience of people who have been like this?
Sometimes I think the addiction isn't just, going out to various readers, but it can become an addiction for reading for yourself. If you have your own, tarot deck, and you can actually kind of get into cycles of just doing that yourself.
I hate to mention the dreaded forums, but have people seen this sort of in forums where people have lots of reading and are very addicted to one issue, or one reader or one answer or that sort of thing?
I don't really go on the forum, so no, I'm not aware of that.
What about you, Mike?
I remember seeing some things, but I don't go on them anymore either. So
no, but in the past, I mean, is the very nature of these things that, say, for instance, the forums, are they part of the addiction? Are they as addictive as the readings?
Oh yes,
I agree.
Oh yes, I think
maybe an important part of them.
I think so. For me personally, the forums fed it. They were another go-to for a little fix.
Right.
I would often find people there who, who were obviously like-minded, who were interested in the things I was interested in, and who I could sort of weevil into and get readings from. And they would pick, that was the nature of the forum. We would tune into each other and pick up, and they would pick up things on me. I don't know how many free readings I got through that and how many I gave in return. So yeah, Sarah and I met in a forum actually. Never actually.
Yeah, I was just thinking when I said that about not going on forums, but we did actually meet on one on Facebook, didn't we? Yeah, that page. Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can see as well the
but
people
I do think,
that get so passionate on them, and they literally go on them all day long. So actually, I'm changing my answer because I've just realised I've forgotten about that. People do get very involved on them, and they literally live their life through them.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
I mean, now sorry.
Go ahead.
Now that you guys are saying this, I'm thinking about, like, me personally, I don't go to forums. It's not my. But I have worked for websites that do have forums, and you can. It's very easy to see. In fact, yeah, it's very, very easy to see how these people get so worked up with what's being said, and then a lot of that is the way they're interpreting it. So again, you get into that whole, I don't think people even hear what someone else is saying. They're just projecting a lot in forums.
Well, one of the things I think I notice about spiritual forums is because of the nature of them being sort of like all open to anything, then a lot of the problems get inflated because there are so many theories coming down the pipeline about everything, and it's easy just to switch from one thing to another, based on, how you feel about it, rather than any sort of objective rules about how things actually work. And so one of the things I notice a lot of times when it comes to readings is that everyone pretty much reads it based on their own problems. And so if someone on a forum offers, to do a reading for you, then generally a lot of times it can be actually manipulative. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It's kind of like we a lot of the people on there, they're there for real reasons, and because they have issues, and because they're upset, and because they're hurt, and a lot of times they're not past that type of pain and hurt where they can actually have a clarity where they can make an actual reading that might be helpful.
There's a tendency with certain groups where certain posters have been on the forum for a long, long time, is they all tend to gang up and mutually reinforce each other, so that they start believing that what they're saying is truth because so many of them are saying it and reinforcing it.
I'd agree with that.
So what are the things that fuel? Let's spin this question on its head. We've talked about forums, readings, spiritualist mediumship, that sort of thing. What are the things that, in our experience of our personal experience and those of others, what are the things that tend to be addictive? I mean, we're using the term spiritual addiction, but we could, and I'd like to discuss, is this stuff spiritual? Is it empowering people, or is it disempowering people? If it's disempowering people, is it consciously doing that, or is it not realizing it's doing that?
I think the first thing that pops into my mind is validation. I mean, everyone seems to be looking for some external validation from some source.
Yes.
I think
it's going to be okay, what's going to happen, taking away the ability just to experience it.
But then this is the question, right? I mean, for example, Gail, as she was, telling us her story earlier, she admits that she was being crafty. One reader didn't know that she was going to another reader. So, for example, someone comes to me for a reading, and I tell them like it is. That may not be the answer that they want to hear,
And how do they generally respond if it's not the answer that they want to hear?
Well, I'm generally able to get through to them enough where if it's not the answer they want to hear, I'll hear the defensiveness, but my job is to break through that. And then what they do with that information, I can show them how to shift the energy, but I can't do it for them.
Do you find that that you take on a responsibility. When they call you for that validation, if you give it, then you're praised. If you don't, then you're, it's the other side of the coin. You're blamed that you're given a responsibility.
Yes, that does happen, but I don't care.
Yeah.
Because I know that my responsibility is to be, to show them the reality of the situation or the objective reality of the situation. And then if they choose to continue to be in denial, then, I can do that much in 1 hour.
I've spoken to people who've been to fortune tellers who've been consistently wrong over years, and what they predicted has never happened. And I asked them why they never left anything other than 5-star feedback. And each one of them said, I didn't want to leave any less because I want to believe it will still come true.
Wow.
I've then asked them, don't you think that's giving unreasonable expectations of the next person who could call that reader? And that's usually followed by a great silence. So that's an interesting aspect of it. There's a sort of insecurity aspect of it, that they still could be right. And one person I spoke to who'd lost a house on the basis of being super addicted to everything still didn't want to go back and say to this person, you were wrong on everything, and leave a 1-star rating just in case one day it came true.
Right.
Wow.
So it does follow addiction, sort of, in my experience of sort of addiction to drugs and alcohol, in the same way. It's super, super addictive. It makes us go into denial. It turns us into liars. We lie to ourselves and our family. And we would give anything for that buzz, that fix.
I would have to agree with that, Steve. And it's something I haven't even touched on. Aside from readings and horoscopes and pendulums and courses, in amongst all of that, I knew that I was miserable, but I also spent an awful lot of money on some very alternative healing modalities over that sort of many months actually, and nothing made me feel any better. I had little layers of things sort of felt improved, but I was this is a very real addiction, and it probably hasn't been recognized by other people. But I really do feel this is up there with other addictions, because all of this spiritual fodder is just literally at the end of your fingertips.
Is it spiritual? Is it spiritual? Because there are people, although there are people there who would see spirituality as empowering you, not keeping you codependent. So is it spiritual? Right. I don't think it is. I think it's social.
It's not. No, it's not. I think it's well-intentioned by people. Yes. I think a lot of it is well-intentioned. People really feel that they're helping other people.
Agreed, yeah.
There may be an element of manipulation in amongst some people and pure, driven by money. But I do feel the bulk of it is well-intentioned. But the real definition of spiritual, no, I don't believe it is.
I think you're right about being well-intentioned. I think people get sucked into it. We've been talking a little about the spiritualist movement and the spiritualist church here, and there's enough there to be a show, definitely. The things you told us. Certainly, I have explored and been part of the spiritualist church, and spoken to a lot of people who have come through it, and there are an awful lot of issues with that. But it's so embedded that people tend to think that when they want to do psychic or medium work, you do it the way the spiritualist church does it, and they don't realize there are other ways of doing it. Because the spiritualist, as in the spiritualist movement, not in spiritual, their way of doing it is so embedded as, quote, the norm, unquote, that people get sucked into it and don't realize they're part of that. So yeah. There are a lot of issues there as to what is spiritual and what is religious, which is spiritualism as a religion. And I think, as you say, the lines are blurred. A lot of people do some very dumb and even cruel things, but by being well-intentioned.
Yes.
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 So let's lead on to Gail. What got you out of it? What changed?
What changed for me was I was a member of probably about half a dozen forums and on about 30 sites on Facebook that I would sort of trawl through on a daily basis. And I remember going through one site and coming across an article that had been shared off your website. And I thought, great. I'm going to contact this man, because at the bottom of your article it said about the work that you did and, made a reference. I remember emailing you, really hoping you were going to tell me what a lot of the readers had also told me and what some hadn't. And I wanted you to tell me everything was going to be all right. So I sent you an email, and you emailed me back, and we had a phone session, a chat. And actually, you didn't tell me what everyone else had said. You told me objectively what the situation was. And it was a turning point for me. And I, for the first time in about 3 years, I stopped everything. I deleted the readings off my phone. I deleted the apps that I'd been using for the horoscope. I packed up my oracle cards and I tucked my pendulum away, and I undertook to do some healing on myself that completely changed my life. And
so it's my fault then.
You've saved me a bloody fortune.
No, I didn't. You did. I just showed you how to do it. That's all.
You did.
you did the work. That's the point. You always had the power. You just never realized it. Yeah.
No. And my life is very, very different now. I'm very peaceful. I have to work at it, on a daily basis. Stuff happens, and I still have to work through those challenges. But I don't need to know anymore what lies ahead. I'm not on any of the forums. I've never looked at my horoscope since. I've, as I say, deleted my readings. I just don't have that need anymore. And it's retrospectively looking back, my life was really quite crazy. It was really unbalanced. I was unwell at the time, and getting fixes on more than a daily basis, several times a day, and free a lot of the time, just online. But a lot of the time I had to pay a lot of money, and it was at the expense of my children's life, livelihood. We're now renting a home. We don't own a property, and life is very different, but I'm a lot more peaceful.
Tell us about India.
I'm grateful. Sorry, say again?
Tell us about India.
Yes, I found the real meaning of spirituality for me, and that was no longer focusing on myself and the need to know what lay ahead. And I went off to India, first of all, on a journey on my own. And I had an amazing adventure, came across a school in India that looks after children who live in a slum, because in India it is a privilege to go to school. It's not a right that we have here, for example, in the UK. And so I came back to England and I set about raising some money. I set a target of £500 and ended up raising £2,000, and went back to India a year later with my partner, and we managed to purchase enough food to feed 90 children for a year. These children now have a meal every day. And we also took about 60 kilos of secondhand stationery, clothes, toiletries, toothbrushes. Yeah, it's certainly been an adventure, and it's given me a taste for something I would love to return. When my children are a bit older and settled, I'm going to return to the slums out there and do some more work. So for me, that is the real meaning of spirituality.
Well done.
It's being there to help other people.
That's inspiring.
Amazing.
Very inspiring.
So does that probably doesn't, silly question, does it make it worth it? Does it make it meaningful to have gone through that torture to come out and see what you've seen now?
Absolutely. I wouldn't have changed it. It was really bloody tough. I really was in a bad way. I was falling apart, but I wouldn't change any of it, because by going there, I was avoiding all this searching. I was avoiding some really deep-rooted old emotional junk that I've carried around since I was young, and I've really been able to deal with that. And now I'm not scared. Life still presents challenges to me, and I'm able to work with it. And I don't have any regrets. It's all worthwhile. And going out there and sitting in the slums with these kids and families in India, I can honestly tell you, hand on heart, it's one of the most inspiring, humbling experiences of my life. And it's changed the course of my life. It really has. And I can't wait to get back out there and do more.
That's excellent. Well done.
That's wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's really inspiring.
I'd like to think that if somebody tunes into this, there must be other people, and I guess, Steve, you would see it through your work. There must be other people who have gone through similar circumstances who are addicted, but perhaps don't recognize that in themselves. And I'd like to think that perhaps someone somewhere listening to this will recognize the signs, because I certainly couldn't see it myself. I couldn't be objective at the time. So it would be great to think that someone out there who's addicted can pick up on this and go, actually, that's me. I recognize that.
Yeah, because when we are addicted, the very nature is that we can't be objective. That's nothing personal. That's part of the whole addiction thing.
I have a question, though. I mean, I wonder, because I have, of course, experienced addiction in my own way. And I would say for me, it was more to a soul connection that the addiction was. But somewhere in the midst of that addiction, which had me in its grip, I still somewhere knew I was supposed to get out of it, but it felt like being on a train that was running and I had to wait for it to stop before I could get off. Or I'd hurt myself even more. Does that make sense?
Do you mean that you were caught in the cycle and you felt powerless? Is that what you're saying? That you needed some outside event or something to break it?
Perhaps. Yes, there were external events that...
What changed?
I mean, it was external events, definitely. But I knew that there was this certain length of period of time that I had to just ride out because I was physically caught up with someone and I couldn't get out of that situation.
Are you saying you couldn't get out of a physical situation which kept you in an emotional situation?
Yes.
Okay. It's interesting because we can escape emotional situations even if we're in the physical situation that creates it, although it's much harder if we are actually triggered by it every day. Then it becomes extremely hard. So I can understand what you're saying.
Okay.
Mike, you were very deeply involved in a system, weren't you?
Yeah.
How was that, and how was it coming out of that, and what made you change?
That's a really good question. Well, I was involved with the occult and Hermeticism, I want to say a good 10 to 13 years. And that makes it sound like it was a really, really long time, but it was more punctuated and it was heavier activity like at the beginning and at the end of that period. But, the type of I guess we'll call it homework that I used to do was there was a lot of it. It was probably an hour or two a day of various rituals and meditations. And so I was really involved in it too. And one of the things that really sort of appears to me now is just how much it was an information-rich system. And, when we hear about readings and, the tarot readings and those kind of things, to me, a lot of that is sort of like a search for some sort of information. And for me, I guess when you talk about leaving that situation, it was sort of a turn from all of a sudden realizing that all of this information hadn't really helped me. But then when I sort of let go of needing to know all this stuff, then the changes started to occur from then on.
Excellent, thank you. So it's the common denominator there, isn't it? Looking for the information that can change how we feel, yeah?
Right.
Yeah.
And as I tell people
looking for an answer.
In the history of mankind, information cannot permanently change how you feel, but that's the chase, isn't it? That's what we go after, yeah? If we can just know, then we'll be okay, yeah?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in conclusion, around the table, what would we do to help somebody? Sarah, what would you do if you had somebody that was like this? And what advice can you offer?
I would talk to them and try and help them see that their behavior was actually hurting them rather than helping them, and point out little ways that they could change that and let them know that they don't need to live that way.
Thank you. Mike, what would you do?
Well, I think probably in terms of giving advice, the one thing I always try to tell anybody is that usually you're in a situation where you're in a lot of pain, and that if you're in that situation and you're suffering a lot, then the ways that you've been doing things up to that point obviously have not been helping. and that the to move out of that, then some sort of choice or change is needed.
That's an interesting point. It's an interesting
Right.
point to tell people, look, you've done it your way so far. Is it working? Because it's hard to let go of doing it our way, isn't it? That again is part of
Yeah.
the addiction thing.
Yeah, and usually a lot of people, they don't really actually want to make that change, and so in terms of being, like not getting in their way, you just sort of present it as a case, that that there are things that you can do to make this kind of change if you want to do that, and then hopefully you plant a seed at the best.
Yeah. Janine, what would you do?
I don't even know that I could begin to say things better than Mike just did. I think just letting the person hear a seed that if things aren't working with what they're doing, that maybe they need to try doing something different, and maybe just making sure that they know that there are other things that are available.
Thank you. Priya, what would you do?
Well, a lot is coming to me as I hear all of you speaking, and I absolutely second everything that Mike said. There's a few things that came to mind. One is people are most afraid of the unknown, and that's what makes you want to know. But my advice to people, and especially in my readings, is teaching people acceptance of what is. And that's very scary. And that's why people try to live in tomorrow, because they don't want to accept what reality is right now.
Is that because of lack of empowerment?
Yes, absolutely. And then often what I try to do with astrology is not focus, because they want to know what's going to happen tomorrow. They want that validation. But I try to bring it back and, get into their chart and look at the way their energy flows, and try to get them to see that, okay, this, like what Mike said, what you've been doing, this pattern that you've been repeating, and it's not working. Where is the seed of this pattern coming from? And that's something that your natal chart will show you. It doesn't mean you're locked into it, but it'll show you the beginnings of where this pattern came from. And then looking at that, there was some event, perhaps, this is just one example, but there might have been some event, perhaps in childhood, that caused a certain need, and the rest of your life has gone towards trying to fulfill this need that was never fulfilled.
Yeah, you're at the core of spirituality, which is achieving oneness, isn't it? Balance and power and completeness within self.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That is definitely what spirituality is about, isn't it? Yeah.
Right. And I've learned this the hard way myself, and that's probably, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, is because I had to learn it myself. And the best that I can do is show someone how to work with their own energy, because we are so individual and we are so unique. But, energy is energy, and it's understanding how your energy is flowing and how to get it back to flowing.
That's an interesting issue. People are unique, but their energy systems are all the same. So
yes,
getting them to recognize that some things we have to all do the same. With some basic principles we can't avoid.
Yes.
Yeah. Excellent. Now,
yes.
And last but by no means least, our guest, Gail, what would you do?
Do you know, it's tough, Steve, because when you're in it, you don't want to hear what other people have to say. And even if they are saying these things to you, even if they're trying to be objective with you, you don't want to know. You can't hear it. So it's a very tough one to try and help someone who has any addiction. But I think what you've all echoed, and what was really important to me was saying to me, is any of this actually working? Like, do you feel any better? And the realization then really hit me. Well, actually, you know what? I don't. I'm miserable. I'm spending my life crying. I'm depressed. I'm no better off through all of these external things I'm doing. I need to look at what's underlying all this and really get to the bottom of it. And it's going to be tough. It can be challenging for some people, but I think it really does help. It's really worth going through that. It's really worth journeying through it to find peace at the end of it.
And it can happen to anybody as well. That's the important point. It can happen to absolutely anybody. And this road is hard. There's no easy version of it.
And I've gone on to witness sort of addictive behaviors in other people since I sort of came out of my addictive phase, and I can see all of those people that I've witnessed have all got this sort of suitcase of old emotional baggage, and they've just used whatever their choice of method of addiction, whatever substance it is, just to suppress dealing with and facing with all those old feelings. So it is it's a very sad state to be in, and I'm just very grateful to have come through that.
I think it's also important to recognize that there's the common belief is that there's a sort of normal, and then there are people that have emotional issues, and that's completely wrong. Everybody has emotional issues of some degree because of the way society is structured. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this idea of healthy and sick, and some people are healthy and some people are sick, it's just not like that. There are shades of grey, and as somebody said, I think it was you, Gail, emotional health is constantly a work in progress.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not like I've gone through this and now everything's fine and I live in a positive world. That would be me being disillusioned. Life has carried on. I've still had lots of challenges since I've stopped my, going to readings and things like that. But I've just worked through them. And with all of those challenges, there have been some really rewarding, fun times too. But I just take it in my stride now, and that's the big difference. I don't need to know anymore what's going to happen 6 months down the line. I'll just deal with that when it comes along.
At which point, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.